On the morning of the third Tuesday of November, in the Meridian Financial Tower on 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, a man named Earl Dawson was doing what he had done every weekday morning for the past 11 years. He was mopping the floor of the 47th floor stairwell. Not the lobby, not the executive suites, not the gleaming corridors where men in tailored suits passed each other with the particular kind of nod that means, I recognize your category of person. The stairwell, the part of the building that no one was supposed to see, the part that existed only to move people between places that mattered. Earl had cleaned it so many times over 11 years that he knew every square foot of it the way a person knows a house they grew up in. He knew the section near the landing where the grout between the tiles had darkened slightly, no matter how many times he scrubbed it. He knew the way the fluorescent light on the 46th landing buzzed for exactly 4 seconds after it turned on before going steady. He knew the cold draft that came through the fire door seal in winter, and the smell of concrete and cleaning solution, and something faintly metallic that lived in stairwells all over this city, regardless of how much money the buildings cost. He pushed the mop in the slow, methodical arc he had perfected over 11 years, working from the top of the landing down, keeping the bucket close, not rushing. Earl Dawson did not rush. He had learned a long time ago that rushing did not make the work better. It only made it look like you were trying to be somewhere else. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. He was 58 years old, broad through the shoulders in the way that comes from decades of physical labor rather than from a gym. His face was the kind that had been handsome when he was young and had kept its structure through the years. Deep brown skin with the fine lines of a man who had spent time outdoors and had laughed and worried in roughly equal measure. His hair was cut close and had gone entirely silver at the temples 2 years ago, a change he had noticed one morning in the bathroom mirror and had not spent much time thinking about afterward. He wore his work uniform the way he wore everything, neatly. His gray shirt was always tucked in. His dark pants were always pressed the night before. He kept a small silver cross on a thin chain under his collar, the one his wife Gloria had given him on the morning of their wedding 27 years ago, in a small Baptist church in the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn, telling him to wear it every day and to remember that he was loved. Gloria had been dead for 9 years. He still wore it every day. He still remembered. The 47th floor of the Meridian Financial Tower was one of 3 floors leased entirely by a company called Harlow Capital Group, a private equity firm that managed assets the trade press estimated at somewhere north of $18 billion. Earl had been cleaning their floors for 6 of his 11 years in the building. He knew the company the way a janitor knows any company, not from the inside. Not from the meetings and the deals and the decisions that happen behind the closed glass doors of the conference rooms, but from the outside of it. From the coffee cups left on the edges of desks and the documents that got printed and abandoned by the copier and the conversations people had in hallways when they thought no one was listening because the person mopping the floor 3 feet away did not count as someone listening. He knew that the fourth quarter had been difficult because he had heard 3 separate conversations in October that all contained the same tight, careful tone people use when they are managing bad news in professional language. And he knew that one of the senior partners had recently separated from his wife because he had seen the man eating alone at his desk for 6 weeks, and then one afternoon had found a small frame photograph face down in the recycling bin beside the man's office door. He knew that the young analyst on the east side of the floor stayed until midnight on Thursdays and left her shoes under her desk because her feet hurt and trusted that no one would be there to see them. Earl knew all of this and held none of it. It was not his business. He was there to clean the floors, and he cleaned them, and he went home. He went home to Maya. Maya Dawson was 9 years old, small for her age, with the kind of eyes that made adults go slightly quiet when she looked at them directly, deep and dark and enormously present. The eyes of a person who was paying close attention to things that other people had not yet learned to notice. She had her mother's cheekbones and her grandmother Gloria's habit of tilting her head to the left when she was thinking hard about something. A gesture so specific and so familiar that the first time Earl had noticed it in Maya, when she was about 3 years old, standing in the kitchen, deciding which cereal to ask for, it had stopped him cold in the middle of the room, and he had stood very still for a moment, holding the weight of recognition. Maya's mother was Denise. Denise had been Earl and Gloria's only child, born when Earl was 29 and Gloria was 28, on a Sunday morning in June at Kings County Hospital. And she had come into the world making noise about it and had continued making noise about most things for 31 years in a way that Earl had sometimes found exhausting and had only understood was a gift after she was gone. Denise had gotten her mother's laugh and her father's stubbornness and a talent for drawing that seemed to belong entirely to herself. She had worked as a graphic designer at a small firm in Long Island City. She had been raising Maya alone after Maya's father, a man named Jerome, had chosen a different life somewhere in Atlanta when Maya was 18 months old and had not been heard from since. Denise had done it without complaint and with a competence that made Earl proud in the specific aching way a parent is proud when they see their child handle something hard and handle it well. For 2 years and 4 months ago, on a wet Tuesday in July, Denise Dawson had been driving home from work on the Long Island Expressway when a car driven by a man who had not slept in 22 hours crossed the center line at 60 miles an hour. The man survived with a broken collarbone and 3 cracked ribs. Denise did not survive. She was 31 years old. Maya was 7. Earl did not allow himself to go back to that Tuesday very often. He had built a kind of internal management system for it, the way you build anything from necessity, carefully over time, with the specific materials available to you. He had a drawer in his mind where that Tuesday lived, and he kept the drawer closed most of the time. He opened it on certain mornings when he woke up and the house was quiet, and the weight of it pressed through before he was fully awake, and he let himself feel the full mass of it for exactly as long as it needed to be felt. And then he got up and made breakfast and woke Maya for school and moved through the day. He was raising Maya in the apartment on Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, where he had raised Denise, a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a brick building that had been built in 1964, and had the particular quality of old buildings that have been lived in by real people, scuffed at the door frame edges and settled slightly in the floors, and familiar in the way that places become familiar when they have absorbed decades of ordinary life. The rent was $1,400 a month, a number that had once been manageable on his salary and on the small income Gloria had made as a home health aide before she got sick, and that had become considerably less manageable after Denise died, and it was just Earl's salary against everything. Earl made $23 an hour at the Meridian Financial Tower. With overtime, which he took whenever it was offered, he brought home approximately $51,000 a year before taxes. $51,000 a year in New York City when you have a 9-year-old granddaughter in your care, and a rent that had been raised twice in 2 years, and medical bills that had accumulated after Maya was diagnosed with asthma 18 months ago. Was bills that the insurance covered partially, and that the partial was a number that had started to live in the back of Earl's mind the way a low, persistent sound lives in a room, always there, never quite loud enough to address directly, but never entirely absent either. He had a savings account with $412 in it. He had 2 months left on the payment plan he had arranged for the larger of Maya's medical bills. He had a notice from his landlord dated the 1st of October informing him that the building was being sold to a development company and that tenants on month-to-month leases, which Earl was, would need to vacate by the 1st of March or negotiate a new lease at the updated market rate. The updated market rate was $2,200 a month. He had not told Maya about the notice. He had told himself he would figure something out, which was what he always told himself. and which had, over the course of his 58 years, always eventually turned out to be true, but which had never once been easy or fast. Figuring something out looked like taking a second job on weekends at a parking facility on Atlantic Avenue. It looked like eating lunch at his desk, which in his case meant eating in the maintenance break room on the second floor of the Meridian building, a peanut butter sandwich and a thermos of coffee brought from home. It looked like calculating the numbers in his head during the 45-minute subway ride to and from work, running the same arithmetic with slightly different variables, looking for the version that came out right. He had not found that version yet. He was still looking. And the stairwell on the 47th floor was quiet at 6:45 in the morning. The Harlow Capitol floor did not begin to fill until 8, sometimes 8:30 for the senior people. At this hour, Earl had the floor mostly to himself, which was the way he preferred it. Not because he was unfriendly, he was not unfriendly. He had known the security guards by name for years, knew which of the building's food service staff were going through hard times, and left the break room coffee made when he finished his shift because he remembered what it felt like to arrive somewhere cold and tired and find something warm already waiting. He simply preferred the work itself, the clean arc of the mop, the specific satisfaction of a surface that was worse when he arrived and better when he left. There was a clarity to it that the rest of life did not always offer. He was 3/4 through the 47th landing when he saw the envelope. It was sitting against the wall at the base of the stairwell, just inside the fire door that connected the stairwell to the 47th floor corridor, in the space between the door frame and the wall where things sometimes ended up when doors were pushed open and something fell. A large envelope, the heavy stock manila kind with a metal clasp, the sort that professional documents came in. It was not unusual to find forgotten items in stairwells. People used them for phone calls and sometimes set things down and forgot them. Earl had found umbrellas, phone chargers, a woman's dress shoe once with no explanation he was ever able to arrive at. Because he set down his mop and picked up the envelope. It was not light. He turned it over. There was nothing written on the outside. No address, no name, no indication of where it had come from or where it was intended to go. The metal clasp was fastened but not sealed. Earl stood in the fluorescent quiet of the stairwell for a moment. Then he opened it. The money was bundled in the way banks bundle money, tight paper bands around thick stacks of $100 bills. There were 5 stacks. He did not have to count them to understand the general scale of what he was holding. Anyone who has ever been in a room with a significant amount of physical cash knows the particular quality of the air when it is present, something heavier and quieter than ordinary air, something with weight. He counted carefully, methodically, the way he did everything. $5,000 per bundle. 5 bundles. $50,000 in his hands in the stairwell of the 47th floor of the Meridian Financial Tower at 6:47 in the morning. He stood completely still. There was also, at the bottom of the envelope under the bundles of cash, a single business card, heavy cream stock, embossed lettering. The name on it read, Gerald H. Whitfield, Senior Partner, Harlow Capital Group. There was a direct phone number printed beneath the name in small, clean type. Earl looked at the business card. He looked at the money. He looked at the fire door leading back to the 47th floor corridor. He put the business card back in the envelope. He put the money back in the envelope. He fastened the clasp. He picked up his mop and his bucket, and he walked out of the stairwell and down the corridor toward the maintenance office on the 47th floor, and he did not stop walking. He ran into Terrence Webb in the corridor outside the supply closet. Terrence was 29 years old, 3 years into the job, a good worker when he applied himself, and a convincing procrastinator when he did not. He and Earl had what might be described as a working friendship, the kind built on shared break room hours and the particular camaraderie of people who perform unglamorous labor in glamorous buildings. Terrence had a quick mind and a quicker mouth, and a habit of saying the thing he was thinking before the filter had quite caught up to it, which Earl found mostly entertaining and occasionally exhausting. "What you got there?" Terrence said, looking at the envelope. Found it in the stairwell, Earl said. Terrence's eyes went to the envelope and then to Earl's face with the specific attention of someone who had already run a preliminary calculation. He straightened up slightly from where he had been leaning against the closet door. How heavy is that? Heavy, Earl said. He tried to walk past. Terrence stepped slightly to the side, not blocking him exactly, but not moving entirely out of the way either. Earl, how heavy is it? Earl stopped. He looked at Terrence. Terrence was looking at the envelope with an expression that was not quite greed and not quite hope, but occupied the territory between them where good sense sometimes lost its footing. Earl had seen that expression on people before, and he understood it, and he did not hold it against Terrence because he understood exactly where it came from. He understood it the way he understood most hard things from the inside. There's $50,000 in this envelope, Earl said, and there's a business card from one of the senior partners on this floor. Terrence went very still. Earl, he said carefully, you found that in the stairwell, not in somebody's office, not on somebody's desk, in the stairwell. Nobody's going to know. Earl looked at him for a moment. You know who's going to know, he said. Terrence looked at the ceiling briefly with the expression of someone who had anticipated this response and had nevertheless hoped it would not be the one that came. He exhaled. Man, $50,000. Now you understand what $50,000 is? I understand what it is, Earl said. That's rent. That's your granddaughter's medical bills paid off. Terrence stopped, recalculated. That's a year of your life you wouldn't have to grind so hard. He said it not cruelly, but with the specific urgency of someone who genuinely believed he was saying something important. You work 60-hour weeks, Earl. You eat a sandwich at your desk for lunch every day. You got an eviction notice? He paused. I know because you mentioned it once, and I remembered because I've been there. My mother got one when I was 12. He lowered his voice even though the corridor was empty. Nobody in this building is going to miss $50,000. These people spend $50,000 on chairs. Earl looked at him for a long moment. He was not angry. And he did not get angry easily, and he was not angry now. He understood Terrence's math completely. He had run variations of it himself in the 2 minutes since picking up the envelope. Not seriously, not in the way that meant he was actually considering it, but in the way that the mind involuntarily tries on possibilities, when the possibility is large enough and the need is real enough. He had felt the weight of it. He had thought about Maya's inhaler prescription that cost $93 a month. He had thought about the March 1st deadline on the apartment notice. He had thought about the savings account with $412 in it. He had let himself think about all of it, and then he had picked up his mop and started walking. I hear you, Earl said quietly. I do, but I know whose money this is. He held up the envelope. There's a name on a card in here, and I'm going to give it back. He paused. That's all. He walked past Terrence toward the maintenance office and did not look back. Terrence watched him go. He stood in the corridor for a moment longer, leaning against the supply closet door, and then he shook his head slowly and went back to work. And the expression on his face was complicated in the way that expressions are when you have just watched someone do something you believe is foolish and suspect might be right. The maintenance supervisor for the 47th through 49th floors was a woman named Carmen Ruiz, 44 years old, 12 years with the building, efficient and unsentimental in a way that Earl respected deeply. She ran a tight operation, and she was fair about it, one which in his experience was the combination that actually mattered. She was at her desk when Earl came in, working through a supply requisition form with the focused displeasure of someone who had been asked to justify the cost of mop heads for the 4th time this year. She looked up when he came in. She looked at the envelope in his hand. I found this in the stairwell on 47, Earl said. He set it on her desk. There's a business card inside for a Gerald Whitfield on this floor. I think it needs to go back to him. Carmen looked at the envelope. Then she opened it. Then she was very quiet for approximately 10 seconds. She looked up at Earl. You found this in the stairwell, and you brought it straight here. Yes, Earl said. Carmen looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not quite read. Then she closed the envelope and set it on the edge of her desk away from the supply forms. I'll get it to him, she said. She paused. You doing all right, Earl? It was a simple question, asked simply, without the particular loaded quality that questions sometimes carry when people already know the answer. Carmen did not know about the eviction notice. She did not know about Maya's medical bills or the $412. She was just asking because it was a thing people asked each other in the morning in the break room and the hallways of buildings all over the city. I'm all right, Earl said. He meant it. He was not happy exactly, but he was all right, which was a category he had come to understand over the years was distinct from happy and more durable. When he went back out into the corridor and collected his mop and his bucket and finished the stairwell landing and worked his way methodically through the rest of the morning, he did not tell anyone else about the envelope. He did not think about the money during the remainder of his shift, or rather he thought about it the way you think about something you have already decided about, which is to say that it moved through his mind briefly and without catching on anything. The thing he thought about more, on the subway ride home that afternoon, sitting in the yellow light of the A train with his thermos in his bag and his feet aching in the way they ached at the end of every shift, was Maya. He thought about what he was going to make for dinner and whether she had remembered to take her inhaler that morning before school, and whether her teacher had sent home the permission slip for the winter field trip to the Natural History Museum that Maya had been talking about for 3 weeks with the particular intensity she brought to things that genuinely excited her. He thought about the fact that the field trip cost $27 and that he had told Maya he would sign the form and bring in the money by Friday, a Friday that was now 4 days away, and that $27 was not nothing when everything was accounted for the way he accounted for everything, carefully and completely. He got off the train at his stop and walked the 4 blocks to the apartment in the November cold, his breath visible in front of him, his hands in his jacket pockets. The leaves had come down off the trees along Nostrand Avenue and collected in the gutters in the specific way of November, brown and pressed flat by the rain, the last traces of something that had been colorful 2 weeks ago and was now just part of the ground. He passed the bodega on the corner where the owner, a man named Raymond, who had been there for 20 years, lifted a hand in greeting through the window without looking up from whatever he was reading. Earl lifted a hand back. The apartment smelled like something Maya had tried to cook when he came through the door, which meant eggs, which was the one thing she had decided to teach herself to make and which she had been practicing on weekend mornings with increasing confidence. The kitchen showed the evidence of this attempt. She's a pan soaking in the sink, the egg carton on the counter, a paper towel that had been used to wipe something up and then abandoned near the stovetop with the particular crime scene quality of a child's cleaning effort. Maya herself was at the kitchen table with her homework spread in front of her and a glass of orange juice. Her school backpack dropped in the middle of the floor in the direct path of the door, the way she always dropped it regardless of how many times Earl had asked her to put it against the wall. Hey, Grandpa, she said without looking up. Hey, Sweet Pea, Earl said. He set his bag down and moved the backpack against the wall without making a production of it. He looked at the pan in the sink and at the paper towel. Eggs? Maya looked up. She made them correctly this time, she said with great seriousness. Both sides. Hey, both sides, Earl said. That's an improvement. I know, Maya said. She went back to her homework. There was a small scratch of pencil. Then, do you want to see? He went to the refrigerator and she had left 2 eggs on a plate covered with another paper towel, slightly lopsided but genuinely cooked through. And he ate them standing at the counter while she told him about her day, about a disagreement with her friend Jasmine, about whose turn it was to be the line leader, about a science worksheet on weather systems that had been confusing until it suddenly wasn't, about a new girl in her class named Priya who had moved from somewhere far away and had a different kind of lunch that smelled interesting. Earl listened. He listened the way he had always listened to the people who mattered to him, completely with his full attention. One of the way his own father had never listened to him, and the absence of which had taught him early what its presence was worth. Maya talked the way Denise had talked at her age, thoroughly, following the thread of every idea wherever it went, trusting that the person across from her was interested, which Earl always was. She had her mother's voice. It was the thing that sometimes arrived without warning and took his breath for a moment. Not the face so much, though the face was Denise's too. It was the voice, the particular rhythm of it when she was telling him something that had delighted or puzzled her. And he would hear it come around a corner of a sentence, and something in his chest would do a thing that was not exactly pain and not exactly joy, but occupied the precise place where those two things met in a person who has loved someone and lost them and still has to get up the next morning and make breakfast. He signed the permission slip for the field trip after dinner. He put it in Maya's backpack with the $27 in cash, exact, because Maya's teacher had asked for exact change. He stood at the kitchen counter for a moment after Maya went to brush her teeth, looking at the envelope notice from the landlord on the corner of the refrigerator where he had put it 2 weeks ago, because putting it in a drawer felt like ignoring it and throwing it away felt like lying about it. And looking at it on the refrigerator felt like what it was, which was a problem that was real and present and required solving. March 1st was 3.5 months away. The difference between his current rent and the new market rate was $800 a month, which over 12 months was $9,600, which was roughly 1/5 of his annual take-home pay before any of the other numbers were accounted for. He had been running the arithmetic on this for 2 weeks. He had not found the version where it came out clean. He stood at the counter and looked at the notice and thought about the $50,000 for exactly 30 seconds. He thought about what it would have been. He thought about what it would not be. How and then Maya called from the bathroom to say that the toothpaste was almost out, and he wrote toothpaste on the notepad on the refrigerator where he kept the grocery list. And he went down the hall to hear about what she had been reading before bed, a chapter book about a girl who discovers a hidden greenhouse behind her school, where things grow that should not be able to grow in the middle of a city. And he sat on the edge of her bed in the lamplight and listened to her describe it with the focus and pleasure of someone telling him something they genuinely needed to share. He went to bed at 10:30. He lay in the dark for a while, the way he lay in the dark most nights, moving through the day's accounting in his head, the things he had done and the things that remained undone and the things that did not have a clear solution yet, but that he was not willing to stop thinking about, because stop thinking about it was not a position he had ever found useful. He thought about the envelope in Carmen's office. He thought about the business card. He thought about the money that was not his and had never been going to be his, and that he had put down in his mind the moment he started walking. He fell asleep without resolving anything. It was the kind of sleep that people who work physically hard fall into quickly, not peaceful exactly, but total. The body simply closing down for the hours it requires to continue. He did not dream about the money. He dreamed about Gloria, which happened sometimes, not the last years of her illness, but the earlier years. The years of the apartment on Nostrand Avenue and Denise as a small child, and the specific warmth of a life that was modest and genuinely full. He woke at 5:15 with that warmth fading, the way dreams fade, and he lay still for a moment holding the edges of it. Then he got up and started the coffee and began again. He did not know on that Wednesday morning, as he stood at the kitchen counter watching the coffee brew, that on the 47th floor of the Meridian Financial Tower, a security review was already underway. He did not know that the stairwell where he had found the envelope was equipped with a camera, a small and unobtrusive one, mounted above the fire door, part of a building-wide security upgrade that had been installed 18 months ago and that most of the cleaning staff had never been formally told about. He did not know that the footage from that camera had already been reviewed by the building's head of security, a meticulous man named Dennis Park, and that the footage showed with complete clarity a man in a gray work shirt picking up a large envelope, opening it, looking at its contents for a measured moment, and then walking directly toward the maintenance office without pausing or looking back. He did not know that Dennis Park had forwarded the footage, along with a two-paragraph summary, to the office of Gerald H. Whitfield, senior partner of Harlow Capital Group, on the morning of that same Tuesday. He did not know that Gerald Whitfield, who was 61 years old and had spent 4 decades watching how people behaved when they believed no one was watching, he had sat in his corner office on the 47th floor and watched that footage 3 times. Had watched a man in a gray work shirt find $50,000 in a stairwell and make a decision in the space between one breath and the next, and then act on it without hesitation, without looking around, without any of the tells that people display when they are fighting with themselves about something. He did not know any of this. He drank his coffee. He made Maya's school lunch and set it on the counter with a note tucked under the bag. The same thing he put on every note. A small drawing of a sun in the corner and the words, "Have a good day, sweet pea. I love you." Grandpa, because Maya had told him once when she was 7 that she liked knowing the note was there, even if she had already left for school and it was only him reading it. He checked the weather on his phone. Cold, clear. He put on his jacket and his scarf and he picked up his bag and he went back to work. What he could not have known, what no one in his life could have told him, was that a decision he had made without thinking about making it, a decision so fundamental to who he was that it had not even registered as a decision, but simply as the only possible thing to do, had been seen, completely and entirely seen, and that the man who had seen it was in the process of setting something in motion that Earl Dawson, standing at the bus stop on Nostrand Avenue in the cold November morning, with his thermos in his bag and his monthly numbers running their quiet arithmetic in the back of his mind, could not have imagined if he had tried. He was not the kind of man who expected things to happen to him. Sure, he had not been raised to expect them, and life had not given him particular reason to revise that expectation. He had been given Gloria and Denise, and now Maya, and the work he knew how to do, and the ability to sleep at night without the particular weight that comes from having done something you know, to be wrong pressing down on the chest in the dark. He had that. He had considered it, in his private accounting, enough. He did not yet know how wrong that arithmetic was about to be proved. The bus came. Earl got on. The city moved past the windows in its cold November configuration. He thought about Maya's field trip permission slip, signed and ready in her backpack. He thought about the grocery list on the refrigerator. He thought about the 47th floor stairwell and the work that waited for him. And somewhere in the building he was headed toward, a man sat at a corner office desk and watched a piece of footage for the 4th time and made a phone call that would change the particular direction of everything. Gerald Whitfield had a particular habit that his assistant of 14 years, a precise and quietly observant woman named Louise Chen, had noted within the first month of working for him and never entirely stopped thinking about. When he was processing something significant, not the ordinary significant of a difficult deal or complicated negotiation, but the kind of significant that reached deeper than work, he went to the window, not in a dramatic way. He did not stand with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at Manhattan the way people did in films when they were about to say something important. And he simply drifted toward it, the way a person drifts toward warmth in a cold room, without quite noticing they were moving. He would stand with one shoulder against the frame and look at the city with an expression that was not reading anything in the view below, but was using it as a kind of neutral screen onto which he projected whatever he was actually thinking about. He had been at the window for 11 minutes when Louise knocked and came in with the afternoon briefing folder on that Tuesday. She set the folder on his desk without comment. She had learned years ago that commenting on the window habit did not produce useful results. She turned to go. "Louise," he said, without turning from the window. She stopped. "The envelope that came up from building maintenance this morning," the one Dennis Park flagged. "Yes," she said. "Why, did you watch the footage?" "I did." Gerald was quiet for a moment. He looked at the city. The November afternoon had gone gray and flat in the way of November afternoons in New York, when the light runs out early and the buildings lose their definition, and the whole island takes on the quality of a photograph that has been slightly overexposed. He had lived in this city for 32 years and had spent an embarrassing portion of those years looking at it from exactly this window, and he was still not entirely accustomed to how it looked in this particular late autumn light. "I want to know who he is," Gerald said. "The man in the footage, not from the personnel file. I know how to read a personnel file." He turned from the window. "I want to know who he is." Louise looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who had a good idea of what was being asked and was deciding how to respond to it. She had worked for Gerald Whitfield for 14 years. She had watched him conduct business with a precision and an intelligence that she had never stopped finding impressive. She had also watched him, over those same 14 years, eat lunch alone at his desk 4 days out of 5, attend 3 company holiday parties without bringing anyone, and keep the photograph of his late wife Margaret in the bottom drawer of his desk rather than on its surface. Because he had told Louise once, in one of the rare moments when he said things directly, that most people would have wrapped in several layers of implication first. And about keeping it out where he could see it all day made the work feel like a consolation prize, and he refused to let it be that. She had watched him give to charitable foundations and to people who worked for him who were going through hard times, quietly, without announcement, through mechanisms that made it difficult to trace back to him. She had watched him turn down 2 profiles in major business publications because he did not see the value in attention for its own sake. She had watched him 6 months ago at the retirement dinner for his longtime driver of 23 years give a speech that had made 4 of the 12 people at the table cry, including the driver, a formidably composed man named Albert, who had previously shown no public emotion at any point in Louise's recollection. She understood what he was asking. She would find out. "I'll have something for you by end of day," she said. "Thank you," Gerald said. He went back to the window. Louise left quietly and pulled the door most of the way closed behind her, leaving the 2 inches of gap she always left because he preferred it. And she went back to her desk and began making calls, starting with Carmen Ruiz in building maintenance. Gerald Whitfield had grown up in a neighborhood called Hazelwood in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the second of 3 sons of a man named Thomas Whitfield who had worked for 31 years in the Jones and Laughlin steel mill on the river until the mill closed and took 31 years of physical labor and compressed it into a severance check that lasted 18 months. Thomas Whitfield had been a quiet man, not cold, but economical with words in the way of men who spent their days in loud places and valued the silence of home. He had taught his sons 3 things with any consistency: that a man's word was the only currency that could not be inflated or devalued, that you did not take what did not belong to you regardless of circumstance, and that the measure of a person was not what they did when people were watching, but what they did in the 5 seconds before they realized they weren't. Gerald had carried those 3 things through a full academic scholarship to Carnegie Mellon, through a graduate degree in finance at the University of Chicago, through the early years of building Harlow Capital from a 2-person operation in a sublease office in Midtown into the $18 billion firm it had become. He had carried them through the death of his wife, Margaret, 4 years ago, a loss that had reconfigured his internal landscape in ways he was still in the process of mapping. He had carried them through the gradual, mutually acknowledged drift between himself and his son Daniel, who lived in San Francisco and ran a nonprofit and was a genuinely good person, with whom Gerald had, over the years of Margaret's illness and its aftermath, lost the thread of ordinary conversation in a way that neither of them had yet found a way to reopen. He was 61 years old. He ran a company that managed other people's money with a responsibility and a precision that he took seriously in the way he took most things seriously, completely and without performance. He ate lunch alone at his desk. He went to the window when he was thinking. He had more money than he would ever be able to spend, and he lived in a manner that would have surprised most people who knew his net worth. A clean apartment on the Upper West Side, a car he drove himself when the traffic permitted, dinner most nights from the Thai place, 2 blocks from his building, eaten at his kitchen table with a book open beside him. The envelope. He had been carrying it in his jacket pocket for 3 days, which was not unusual for him. He often carried documents and items that needed to be dealt with in his jacket pocket as a reminder system, preferring the physical presence of a thing to a calendar notification. The envelope contained $50,000 in cash, a for the amount he had arranged to give his longtime personal driver, Albert, at the retirement dinner he had hosted for him 2 months ago, and which he had failed to actually deliver at the dinner because Albert had moved him so thoroughly with his own brief and completely unself-conscious speech of thanks that Gerald had stood at the podium and forgotten everything he had planned to say and had subsequently driven home with the envelope still in his pocket. He had been meaning to mail it, then to send it through Louise, then to deliver it personally, and in the way of things that require a specific decision and keep getting deferred. It had moved from his briefcase to his jacket pocket to his desk drawer and back again over 2 months. On the Monday before it turned up in the stairwell, he had brought it to the office with the intention of giving it to Louise to wire to Albert's account. He had taken a phone call in the stairwell that had lasted 40 minutes and had set the envelope on the step beside his foot and walked back to the floor when the call ended and had not noticed until 8 that evening that it was not where he thought it was. He had not reported it missing. He had not told anyone. He was a private man about private things. And then Carmen Ruiz had called Louise, and Louise had called Dennis Park, and Dennis Park had pulled the stairwell footage, and Gerald Whitfield had sat at his desk on a Tuesday morning and watched a man in a gray work shirt find $50,000 and make a decision in the space of a single unhurried moment. He had watched it 4 times, then 5. Wait, not because he was uncertain about what he was seeing, because he was trying to understand when he had last seen something like it, and finding that the answer required going further back than he expected. Louise's report arrived at 4:15 in the afternoon, 9 pages, thorough in the way Louise did everything. Earl James Dawson, 58 years old, born in the Flatbush neighborhood of Brooklyn, 11 years with the Meridian Financial Tower cleaning staff. Current position, senior maintenance worker, 47th through 49th floors. Wife Gloria deceased, 9 years. Daughter Denise deceased, 2 years and 4 months. Currently the sole guardian of one granddaughter, Maya Dawson, age 9, currently enrolled at PS 249 in Brooklyn. Monthly income, medical history context for the granddaughter, the eviction notice, the parking facility weekend job, the savings account balance which Louise had not been able to obtain directly, but had triangulated through 2 years of available financial data to a number she noted with characteristic precision, was approximately the cost of a reasonable dinner at the kind of restaurant Gerald hosted client meetings in. Gerald read the 9 pages from beginning to end. He set the report on his desk. He was quiet for a long time. Then he called Louise back in. "I need to speak with him," he said. "Not through HR, not through Carmen Ruiz, directly. Can you arrange it for this week?" Louise said she could. He paused. "One more thing." He looked at the report on his desk. The field trip, the $27. "Has she already paid it?" Louise looked at him. "I don't know." "Find out," Gerald said. "If she hasn't, make sure it's covered before Friday, anonymously, through the school's general fund if possible." Louise nodded once. She went back to her desk, and Gerald went back to the window. The message came through Carmen Ruiz on Wednesday afternoon, delivered in person rather than by email, which was unusual enough that Earl noticed it. Carmen appeared at the supply closet on the 48th floor, where he was restocking paper towels, and said with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information whose significance they were not entirely sure of, that Gerald Whitfield's office had requested that Earl come to the 47th floor executive suite at 9 o'clock Friday morning. Earl looked at her. Not the maintenance office. The executive suite. Carmen looked back at him. That's what his assistant said. Earl thought about this. All right, he said. Carmen looked at him for a moment longer. She was not an emotional woman by nature, not in the way of people who show it easily, but she had a quality of directness that sometimes communicated things that other people needed several sentences to say. You did the right thing, Earl, she said. She said it the way she said most things, simply without embroidery. Then she went back to her own work. Earl went back to the paper towels and did not make anything of the moment, which was itself a kind of statement. Terrence found out about the meeting the same way Terrence found out about most things in the building, through the particular information network that exists in every large workplace among the people who move through the invisible parts of it. He caught up with Earl in the break room on Thursday morning, sitting down across from him with a coffee in his hand and the expression of a man who had been thinking something through for 2 days and had finally arrived at a place where he needed to say it out loud. You got a meeting with Whitfield. Earl ate his sandwich. I got a meeting with Whitfield. Terrence was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you think he wants? I think he wants to say thank you, Earl said, for returning what was his. Terrence turned his coffee cup in his hands. He said, do you ever wonder? No, Earl said without looking up from his sandwich. Terrence stopped. Then he almost laughed. Just like that? Just no? Just no, Earl said pleasantly. He took another bite of his sandwich. Terrence looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at Earl with the expression of someone who had decided to say something directly. Imam, I've been thinking about what I said in the corridor. On Tuesday, Earl waited. I shouldn't have pushed you like that, Terrence said. About keeping it, he paused. I knew it was wrong when I said it. I said it anyway because $50,000 is $50,000, and I was thinking about what I would do. He stopped. That wasn't fair to you. Earl looked at him. He looked at Terrence the way he looked at most people who said something honest to him, with full attention and without the particular guardedness of someone preparing a countermove. Terrence was 29 years old. He had grown up in Harlem with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who had been intermittently present and intermittently not. He understood what money looked like from the outside and what its absence felt like from the inside. And he had said what he said in the corridor out of a specific kind of desperation on behalf of someone else, which was not entirely the same as saying it on his own behalf. I know, Earl said. He was not dismissive about it. He let Terrence have the directness of his acknowledgement. You were trying to help me in the way that seemed most logical at the time. I understand that. Terrence nodded. He drank his coffee. Then after a moment, how do you just do that? He said. How do you just pick something up and put it down and not think about it? Earl was quiet for a moment. He looked at his sandwich. I did think about it, he said. I thought about it for 30 seconds. He paused. I thought about my granddaughter, and I thought about what I owe her, not the money I owe her. He stopped. White chose the words carefully in the way he chose most things carefully. The example. That's what I owe her, because her mother is gone, and I'm the one she has. And what she sees me do is what she's going to understand as the way things are done. He looked at Terrence. I can't take $50,000 that belongs to someone else and then look Maya in the eye and tell her that honesty is what matters. He folded the top of his sandwich bag. That's all it is. It's not complicated. Terrence looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, I hope he does something real for you. Whitfield, not just a thank you. Earl put his sandwich bag in his jacket pocket to throw away later because he did not leave trash in the break room. I don't help people for what they do for me in return, he said. He said it without self-righteousness, the way a person states a fact about the weather. But I appreciate you saying it. He got up and went back to work. Terrence sat at the break room table for a while longer, turning his cup in his hands, thinking about the difference between knowing what the right thing was and actually doing it in the moment when the moment arrived, and about how much harder the gap between those 2 points was than it looked from the outside. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The Friday morning meeting happened in the way of things that you have prepared yourself for and that are still different than you prepared for. Earl arrived on the 47th floor at 8:55, in wearing his work uniform because it was a work day, and changing into something else would have felt like pretending to be something he was not, which was not a thing he did. He had pressed his shirt the night before. His shoes were clean. He stood in the corridor outside the executive suite reception area and breathed for a moment. Louise Chen came out to meet him herself, which he had not expected. She was a small and efficient woman with glasses and the bearing of someone who was very good at her job and saw no reason to be casual about it. She shook his hand. She thanked him for coming. She said Mr. Whitfield was ready, and she led him through the glass doors into a part of the 47th floor he had cleaned for 6 years and never entered. In the corner office was at the end of a carpeted corridor lined with glass-walled conference rooms. It had the particular quality of a space that belonged to someone who had not decorated it to impress visitors, but to be functional for themselves. Bookshelves that held books that looked read rather than displayed. A desk with 2 monitors and a surface covered in working documents rather than arranged objects. A single painting on the wall that Earl looked at briefly before looking away. A landscape, a wide expanse of water under a sky going gray. The kind of painting that makes a room feel larger and quieter at the same time. Gerald Whitfield was standing near the window. He turned when Earl came in. In 6 years of cleaning the 47th floor, Earl had seen Gerald Whitfield from a distance perhaps a dozen times, even the way a person who works in the unseen parts of a building occasionally glimpses the people in the visible ones. He knew him by name and by the light under his office door and by the quality of the documents left near the printer on the late nights. Up close, he was a man in his early 60s with a steady, direct quality to his gaze that Earl recognized as belonging to people who had learned to look at things squarely, because looking away had cost them something once. Gerald crossed the room and extended his hand. Earl Dawson. I'm Gerald Whitfield. I know, Earl said, and shook the hand. Please sit down. Gerald gestured toward the seating area on the near side of the room, 2 chairs and a low table, the kind of arrangement that was designed for a conversation rather than a meeting. Earl sat. Gerald sat across from him. There was coffee on the table, and Gerald poured a cup and held it out, and Earl took it because refusing would have been rude, and Earl was not rude. I want to start by saying thank you, Gerald said. He said it simply, without the performative quality that thank you sometimes has when it comes from people who are not accustomed to needing to say it. The money in that envelope was mine. It had been missing for 2 days, and I hadn't reported it because it was a personal matter. He paused. You didn't know that. All you knew was that there was a large amount of cash in a stairwell. Earl nodded. And you brought it back, Gerald said. He was quiet for a moment. I watched the security footage. There was no hesitation. Earl looked at his coffee. There's not much to hesitate about, he said. It wasn't mine. Gerald held that response for a moment. He turned his own coffee cup in his hands. He had the unhurried quality of a man who was not going to speak faster than the moment required. Outside the window, the November morning was clear and cold, the city lit with the low, sharp light of late autumn. "I've been running this company for 24 years," Gerald said. "I have watched a great many people make decisions about money that belongs to other people." He paused. "Both in the world of finance, where it is often done with legal cover and sophisticated language, and in smaller, more direct situations." He looked at Earl. "I want to tell you something honestly. What you did in that stairwell is not common. I don't say that as a compliment. I say it as a fact." Earl looked at him. "It didn't feel uncommon," he said. "It felt like the only thing to do." Gerald nodded slowly. "That's what I mean." He looked at his coffee. "When something feels like the only thing to do, it tells you something about the person's character. Not the decision, the feeling behind it." He paused. "My father used to say something. He was a steel worker in Pittsburgh. He said a man's word is the only currency that can't be devalued." He looked at Earl. "What you did in that stairwell was your word." Earl looked at him for a moment. Something in that sentence had landed in a way that surprised him. "My father said something like that too," he said. "Different words, but the same idea." He paused. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was honest. I understood early on what that was worth. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'd like to do something for you." He said it directly and without the particular awkward brightness that people sometimes use when they are offering charity and are uncomfortable calling it that. "I don't mean a reward in the formal sense. I mean something meaningful. I've read a little about your situation. I hope that doesn't feel like an intrusion." He paused. "Louise is thorough. It's her value and occasionally her crime." Earl looked at him steadily. "What have you read?" Gerald told him directly what he knew. The eviction notice, the medical bills, the Saturday job. Maya. He told it the way Louise had given it to him, as facts without embellishment, but without minimizing either. Earl listened with his coffee cup in his hands. His expression did not change in the way of someone who was surprised. And he had the quality of a person who had long since made peace with the fact that his difficulties were real and visible, and not something to be ashamed of. When Gerald finished, Earl said, "That's accurate." Gerald looked at him. He had met a great many people in 40 years of professional life. He had negotiated with people who were brilliant and people who were ruthless, and people who were both and people who were neither. He had sat across from senators and CEOs and foreign ministers in rooms considerably more ornate than this one, and had conducted those conversations with a composure and a skill that had built him a reputation. He had not in a considerable time sat across from someone and felt the particular quality of presence that Earl Dawson put into a room. Not charisma in the performed sense, something quieter. The quality of a person who had nothing to prove and therefore nothing to manage, who was simply there completely without the social calculation that most people maintain as a background process without realizing it. "I want to help," Gerald said, "with the apartment, with Maya's medical bills. I want to set it right in a way that gives you room to breathe." Earl looked at him. He looked at the man directly in the way of someone who was thinking something through. He did not rush his response. He did not perform gratitude or perform reluctance. He simply sat with the offer for a moment and gave it the consideration it deserved. "Why?" he said. He said it the same way Maya had asked him once, about something she didn't understand. Plainly, without hostility, genuinely wanting to know the reason behind the thing. Hey, Gerald looked slightly surprised, not offended, surprised in the way of someone who had not expected the question and found its directness unexpectedly welcome. He thought about it for a moment. "My father told me three things when I was growing up," he said. "That your word is your only currency, that you don't take what isn't yours, and that the measure of a person is what they do in the 5 seconds before they realize no one's watching." He paused. You were in that stairwell before 6:50 in the morning. You had no reason to believe there was a camera. You were alone with $50,000 and a choice. He looked at Earl. My father would have said you passed the only test that matters. He looked at his hands. I lost him 15 years ago. He didn't live to see the company. He didn't live to see any of it. He paused. What I can do, what he said quietly, and mean it in a way that he would have understood, is recognize the kind of person he raised me to recognize. He looked at Earl. That's why. The office was very quiet. Outside, the city continued its Friday morning motion. Earl held his coffee cup and looked at Gerald Whitfield across the low table. And he thought about his father, and about Gloria, and about Denise, and about what it meant to receive something from someone who was giving it from a place that was real rather than from a place of performance or guilt, or the kind of transactional generosity that is really just a different form of keeping score. He thought about Maya asking him last week, after he had read to her from the chapter book about the hidden greenhouse, whether things really worked out like that in real life, whether people really found hidden good things when they weren't looking for them. He had told her that he believed they did sometimes, if you kept your eyes open and kept moving, and did not let the difficulty of things make you into someone who couldn't receive goodness when it arrived. He had believed it when he said it. He always tried to believe the things he told her. I appreciate what you're saying, Earl said. I want to be honest with you too. I didn't return that envelope because I expected anything from it. I returned it because it was the right thing to do, and because I am trying to raise my granddaughter to understand that the right thing is worth doing, regardless of what comes from it. Gerald nodded. So I need you to know that I'm not sitting here because I helped you and I expect a return, Earl said. I'm sitting here because you asked me to come and it seemed rude not to. He paused. But I'm also not going to pretend that I don't need help, because I do. He looked at Gerald steadily. Maya needs stability. She's had too much taken from her already. If you're offering something that gives her that, I'm not going to refuse it for the sake of pride. Gerald looked at him for a long moment. Then something in his expression shifted, not into softness exactly, but into a kind of recognition that Earl had seen before in people who were used to carrying things alone, and who occasionally encountered someone else who understood that particular weight. That's one of the most honest things anyone has said to me in a professional context in 20 years, Gerald said. This isn't a professional context, Earl said. When you asked me in to have a conversation, we're having one. Gerald almost smiled. Almost. He set his coffee cup down. I'd like to do more than cover the immediate bills, he said. I'd like to talk about something larger, a longer-term thing. He paused. But I want to do it correctly, not as a transaction. I don't want to write you a check and feel good about myself and go back to eating lunch at my desk. He looked at Earl directly. I want to understand what you actually need and what Maya actually needs, and I want to figure out whether there's something I can do that addresses the real thing and not just the surface of it. Earl looked at him. That's going to take more than one conversation, he said. I know, Gerald said. I have time. He paused. Do you? Earl thought about the 48th floor corridor waiting for him. He thought about Carmen and Terrence and the supply closet and the 11 years of stairwells. He thought about Maya and the field trip permission slip and the eviction notice on the refrigerator. I have time, he said. They talked for another 40 minutes. Not about the money, not specifically, and not about the envelope. They talked about Pittsburgh and Brooklyn and what it meant to grow up with fathers who communicated through principles rather than conversations. They talked about the Whitmore housing market and about what it cost to raise a child in New York on a single income, and about the specific texture of grief when it came for the people you had most expected to outlast you. Gerald told Earl about Margaret without being asked, on the way people sometimes tell things to strangers or to people they have decided to trust past the threshold of strategy. Earl told Gerald about Gloria and Denise in the same register, factually with care, allowing them to be real people in the room rather than backstory. When Earl left the 47th floor executive suite at 10:15 that morning, Louise Chen walked him back to the corridor and shook his hand again and said, with the specific precision of someone who chose words the way other people chose investments, that it had been a pleasure. Earl said it had been a pleasure for him as well, and he meant it. He went back to work. The stairwell needed finishing. The 48th floor corridor required the weekly wax treatment. There were 3 restrooms that needed complete cleaning before noon. He worked through the rest of the morning with the same methodical attention he brought to everything, moving from task to task, keeping the bucket close, not rushing. He did not tell anyone in detail what had been said in the corner office. He told Carmen that the meeting had gone well, and Carmen nodded with the expression of someone who had suspected it would. He told Terrence when who found him at the supply closet at lunch and was visibly attempting not to ask questions, that he was fine and that the conversation had been a good one. Terrence looked at him for a moment. He actually seems like a real person. Whitfield? Earl considered this. He's a real person, he said. He's carrying some things. But then most people are. Terrence nodded slowly. He leaned against the wall. For a moment, the two of them stood in the quiet of the service corridor listening to the building. Do what buildings do. The low hum of climate systems, the distant elevator chime, the muted conversation coming through the wall from whatever meeting was happening on the other side of it. You think something's going to change? Terrence said. He said it without loading it, just asking. Earl thought about it honestly. Something already has, he said. He was not specific about what he meant. He wasn't entirely sure himself, not yet. But sitting in that office with a man who had looked at a piece of security footage and seen something worth paying attention to, who had read 9 pages about a janitor's life and responded not with pity but with curiosity, Earl had felt something shift in a way that was subtle and real, and he was not yet ready to name it. He picked up his bucket. He had 3 more floors to do before the end of his shift. The thing that changed everything, that rearranged the entire landscape of what had begun as a small act in an empty stairwell, did not happen on that Friday. It happened 8 days later, on a Saturday morning at 7:23, when Earl's phone rang on the kitchen counter while he was making breakfast, and Maya was asleep and the apartment was holding its quiet Saturday quality that he had always loved, the specific peace of a morning with nowhere to be. The number was Gerald Whitfield's direct line. Earl had it now because Gerald had given him a card at the end of Friday's meeting. He had put it in the small dish on his dresser where he kept things he needed to keep track of and had thought about it twice since, not with anxiety but with the kind of quiet attention he gave to things that mattered and were still in the process of becoming clear. He answered on the second ring. Earl Dawson, good morning. Gerald's voice on the phone had the quality of a man who was up early by habit and for whom mornings were a working time rather than a transitional one. There was something underneath the businesslike quality of it that Earl registered without immediately locating. A different texture. He's calling early on a Saturday, Earl thought. Something has happened. I apologize for the early hour, Gerald said. I wanted to reach you before the day got away from both of us. It's fine, Earl said. He moved to the window and looked out at Nostrand Avenue in the gray November morning. A delivery truck was idling outside the building across the street. A woman with a stroller was moving quickly down the sidewalk, head down against the wind. I've been thinking about our conversation, Gerald said, and about something you said, about what you owe your granddaughter. Not the money, the example. He paused. There was the texture underneath again, something that Earl now identified as a kind of careful deliberateness, the tone of someone who was about to say something they had prepared to say and were aware of the weight of it. I made some calls this week, Gerald said. I have a connection with a development firm that holds a number of residential properties in Brooklyn. He paused, including, as it turns out, into a building on Crown Street in Crown Heights, a two-bedroom that is coming available in February. He paused again. The building management has agreed to offer a below-market lease with a fixed rate for 5 years. No increases. He stopped. I want to be clear that this is not a gift from me to you. It's a proper lease in your name. What I've done is guarantee the first 2 years of the differential between the market rate and the rate you can afford, and I've set up the guarantee structure so that it runs entirely through the property management company. He paused. You will be a tenant with a standard lease. That's all. No obligation to me, no strings, no conditions. Earl stood at the window. He looked at the delivery truck. He looked at the woman with the stroller turning the corner and disappearing. He stood very still in the way of someone who is hearing something that requires them to stand very still. You don't have to decide now, Gerald said. Take the time you need. I'd just ask you to look at the place before you decide. Earl said, Why Crown Street? Because, Gerald said, it's 3 blocks from Maya's school. The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee maker had finished its cycle. From down the hall came the specific small sounds of a 9-year-old beginning to wake up, a rustle, the particular creak of the second floorboard from the door that Maya always stepped on, because she had not yet learned to step over it, the way Earl had learned to step over it years ago when Denise was small. Earl thought about the eviction notice on the refrigerator. He thought about March 1st. He thought about Maya asking him whether things really worked out in real life, and about what he had told her. He thought about what it meant to receive something from someone who had done the work of understanding what was actually needed and had addressed that specific thing rather than the easier version of it. He thought about his father, about what his father would have said about a man who gave not to feel good about himself, but because he had recognized something worth recognizing and had decided to act on it properly. His father would not have called it charity. His father would have called it respect. I'd like to see it, Earl said. Good, Gerald said. There was something in his voice that was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it. The quality of a person who has offered something important and has been waiting, ought without showing the waiting, to find out whether it would be received. We could go together if you like. This weekend, if that works. Bring Maya. He paused. She should get to see it before anyone decides anything. Earl looked down the hall toward the sound of Maya beginning her morning. He thought about her face when she saw somewhere new. The way her eyes went careful and then gradually open, like a door being tested on its hinges. He thought about 3 blocks from her school. He thought about a fixed rate for 5 years. I'll ask her, he said. Good, Gerald said. And Earl. One more thing. Earl waited. The medical bills. I've spoken to a colleague who runs a healthcare foundation. They have a patient support fund for families in exactly your situation, and I've arranged for your file to be reviewed on an expedited basis. He paused. Surrender, there is no connection to me in the application. It goes through the foundation's normal process. You'll receive a letter from them next week. Earl was quiet. I want to be clear that I'm not trying to manage your life, Gerald said. I'm trying to clear the debris off the road so that you can drive on it. He stopped. The decisions about where you drive are entirely yours. Earl stood at the window for a moment longer. Then he said, Mr. Whitfield. Gerald. Gerald, Earl said, I want you to understand something. He paused. I worked in that building for 11 years without anybody on the 47th floor knowing my name. He said it without bitterness, simply as a fact. That's the way these things work, and I've never been resentful of it because I understood the arrangement. He paused. What you did this week, what you've done with this phone call, it's not just that it helps me practically. He stopped. You saw me. He said it plainly. You saw who I actually am, and you treated that as worth something. He was quiet for a moment. I want you to know that matters to me more than the money, more than the apartment. Gerald did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had the quality of a man who was not accustomed to being received this directly, and who was finding that it required him to be equally direct in return. "I saw who you are," he said. "Yes." He paused. "I should also tell you that it's been a long time since I've sat with someone and felt like I was in the room with a real person." He said it carefully, aware of the weight of it. Not a role, not a function. He stopped. "I'll leave it there before I embarrass myself." Earl almost smiled. Whereas he very nearly said something about the window habit that Louise had described in passing when walking him out on Friday, but decided to leave it. "Saturday morning," he said. 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, Gerald said. "I'll send the address." He hung up. Earl set the phone on the counter. He looked at the eviction notice on the refrigerator. He looked at the grocery list beside it. He looked at Maya's drawing that she had taped next to the list last week, a drawing of the two of them in the apartment with the window visible behind them, done in the careful, specific way she drew everything, getting the proportions roughly right, adding the small details that mattered to her, the cross on his chain, the crack in the window frame she had been asking him to fix for 2 months. Down the hall, Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, and her hair loose from its braids, blinking in the kitchen light. She looked at her grandfather standing at the window with the phone in his hand. "Who was that?" she said. Earl looked at her. "Come have breakfast," he said. "I need to tell you about something." Maya came to the kitchen table and sat down and looked at him with the full, attentive eyes that had been stopping adults in their tracks since she was old enough to direct them. Earl poured her orange juice and poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "You know how I always tell you that doing the right thing is worth it," he said, "even when it's hard, even when there's no obvious reason to expect anything from it." Maya looked at him. "You found something and gave it back," she said. "Didn't you?" Earl looked at her. He thought about Denise. He thought about the things children understand without being told them, the way they read the texture of a room before they can name what they are reading. "How long have you known?" he said. "Since Tuesday," Maya said matter-of-factly. "Terrence's cousin goes to my school." She paused. "He told LaToya that you found a lot of money in the stairwell and gave it back, and the man whose money it was wants to talk to you." Earl sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Word travels." "It always does," Maya said, with the serene authority of a 9-year-old who has been paying attention to how the world works. She tilted her head to the left, the Gloria gesture, the Denise gesture, traveling down the line to her. "So what happened?" she said. Earl told her. He told her about Gerald Whitfield and about the conversation in the corner office and about the phone call this morning. He told her about Crown Street, 3 blocks from her school, a fixed rate for 5 years. He told her about the foundation and the medical bills. He told her all of it clearly and without smoothing the edges of it because she was 9 years old and had already had harder things smoothed over and had not found the smoothing useful. Maya listened with her orange juice in both hands and her head tilted to the left and her enormous present eyes moving over his face in the way of someone who was reading the full version of what was being said. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. 3 blocks from school, she said. 3 blocks, Earl said. "Can I bring Jasmine to see it?" Earl looked at her. When he looked at this girl who was Denise's daughter and Gloria's granddaughter, and who had survived the last 2 years with a dignity and a resilience that he had never once had to prompt or encourage, who drew their apartment from memory and got the proportions right and remembered to include the crack in the window frame, who asked if she could bring her friend because her instinct, even in a moment of change, was to share it. "Yeah," he said, "you can bring Jasmine." Maya nodded. She drank her orange juice. Then she said, with the particular gravity of a 9-year-old delivering a verdict that she had been considering carefully, "I think it was worth it. Giving it back." Earl looked at her. "I know it was," he said. Maya set down her glass. She looked at the eviction notice on the refrigerator, the one that had been there for 6 weeks. Then she looked at her grandfather. "Are we going to be okay?" she said. She said it the way she said most things directly, wanting the true answer and trusting that she would receive it. Earl looked at her across the kitchen table. He thought about a stairwell at 6:47 in the morning and a decision that had taken no time at all. He thought about a man at a window watching footage 5 times. He thought about what his father had told him and what he had tried imperfectly and persistently to pass on. He thought about a 9-year-old girl asking him whether things really worked out in real life. "Yeah," he said, "we're going to be okay." Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she got up from the table and put her glass in the sink and went back to her room to get dressed for the day. And the particular certainty with which she moved, the absence of doubt in her small shoulders, told Earl that she believed him. He sat at the table alone for a moment. He looked at the grocery list. He looked at the drawing on the refrigerator, the two of them in the apartment with the window behind them and the cross on his chain and the crack in the window frame that he still needed to fix. He added window caulk to the grocery list. Then he got up and started making breakfast. And the apartment held its Saturday quiet around him, warm and familiar and entirely itself. And the morning moved forward the way mornings do, one ordinary moment after the next, which is how every extraordinary thing is eventually built. He did not know on that Saturday morning that what was coming was larger than an apartment and a medical bill and a man at a window. He did not know what Gerald Whitfield had been thinking about since Friday, what he had decided in the quiet of his own kitchen the night before, what Louise had been asked to prepare that had nothing to do with lease agreements or foundation applications. He did not know that there was a conversation still to come that would change not just the shape of his daily life, but the shape of everything he believed was possible for the life ahead of him. He was a man who cleaned floors in a building he did not own, raising a girl who was not his daughter, carrying a loss that did not get lighter, but that he had learned to carry without letting it change the direction he walked. He was a man who found $50,000 and put it down and walked away from it and thought nothing of it because it was the only possible thing to do. And he did not know yet what that made him. He was about to find out. The apartment on Crown Street was on the second floor of a brownstone that had been built in 1927 and had kept its bones through every renovation since. Wide windows that faced east and caught the morning light. Hardwood floors with the particular warmth of old wood that has been lived on by generations of real people. 2 bedrooms with enough space between them that Maya, standing in the doorway of the smaller one, turned around slowly with her arms out to measure it and declared it bigger than she needed, which Earl understood to mean she loved it. Jasmine, who had been allowed to come as promised, was stood at the east window looking out at Crown Street and said it reminded her of the apartment in a book she had read where good things kept happening to the people who lived there. Maya told her that was a specific thing about the book and not a general property of apartments. Jasmine said she knew that. Neither of them moved away from the window. Gerald stood in the main room with Earl and said nothing for a while. He had driven to Brooklyn himself, without a driver, in the clean, practical car he preferred, and he had stood in the apartment's empty rooms with the expression of a man checking whether something he had hoped for was actually what he thought it was. The light came through the east windows at the angle it would come through every morning from here forward, and it was good light. He had thought it would be. Earl looked at the light. He looked at Maya at the window with Jasmine. He looked at the distance between the 2 bedrooms and thought about what it meant to have enough space. Not luxury, just enough. The particular sufficiency of a place where a child could exist without compressing herself to fit. "It's a good apartment," he said. Gerald nodded. "It is." Earl looked at him. He had been thinking since the Saturday phone call about what he wanted to say when he saw Gerald again, and had arrived at the understanding that what he wanted to say was simple, and that simple was the right register for it. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the apartment specifically. For the way you've done all of this." He paused. "You didn't make me feel small." He looked at Gerald directly. "You have no idea how much that matters." Gerald held that for a moment. His jaw moved slightly in the way of someone receiving something they had not prepared a response for. Then he said quietly, "My father would have liked you very much." They stood in the good light and said nothing else for a while, which was the right thing. Maya chose her room. She stood in the center of it and turned once more with her arms out and then put them down and said she was going to put her desk under the window so she could draw while looking at the street. Earl told her they didn't have a desk. She told him they could get one. He told her they could get one. 3 weeks later, they moved. The move took one Saturday and the help of Terrence, who showed up at 7 in the morning with a borrowed van and a coffee and did not make a single comment about anything except the weight of Earl's bookcase, which he described as an act of aggression against the people who had to carry it. Earl's neighbor Raymond from the bodega came out when the van was being loaded and shook Earl's hand and said he had better come back to the neighborhood to shop, which Earl said he would, because Nostrand Avenue was still his neighborhood even if his address was changing. Raymond seemed satisfied with this. Maya carried her own boxes. She had packed them herself, labeling each one in her particular, careful handwriting. Books, art stuff, important things. The box labeled important things was the smallest and the heaviest, and she did not let anyone else carry it. Gerald did not come to the move. He had offered, and Earl had told him honestly that the move was a family thing, and that family for these purposes included Terrence and Raymond, and not a senior partner from a private equity firm. No offense intended. Gerald had said none taken, and Earl had believed him. What happened instead was a letter. It arrived at the Crown Street apartment on the second day after the move, before they had properly unpacked, when the boxes were still stacked in the main room, and Maya's desk, the one they had found at a used furniture shop on Atlantic Avenue for $40, was sitting in the middle of her room not yet assembled. Earl found the letter on the floor inside the front door, slid under it in the way of something hand-delivered. He sat down on a box in the main room and read it. It was 3 pages. Handwritten on heavy cream paper in the careful script of a man who wrote by hand when the thing he was writing mattered. Gerald wrote about his father. He wrote about Pittsburgh and the mill and the 3 principles and what it had meant to grow up, understanding that your word was your only real currency. He wrote about Margaret briefly and without excessive detail, in the way of someone who has learned to hold a great loss in a small space without diminishing it. He wrote about Daniel in California and about the specific silence between them that had grown during Margaret's illness and had not yet been properly addressed. He wrote about sitting at a window in a corner office, watching a piece of security footage and feeling for the first time in a long time that he had seen something real. Then he wrote about what he had decided. Earl read that section twice. Gerald Whitfield had established a foundation, not a new one, an expansion of a small donor-advised fund he had maintained for years through the firm, structured as a standalone charitable organization with its own board and its own operational mandate. The mandate was specific: financial support and professional development for working families in New York City, navigating circumstances similar to the ones he had read about in Louise's 9-page report: emergency housing stabilization, medical debt relief, educational support for children in the care of grandparent guardians. He had named Earl as the foundation's first community liaison, a paid position, a real salary, more than double what Earl made at the Meridian building, with benefits, with the specific understanding, written clearly in the letter, that Earl's value to the foundation was not administrative. It was the thing that could not be manufactured or hired for. The understanding of what the people with the foundation served actually needed, because he had needed it himself. The knowledge of what it felt like to carry the arithmetic in the back of your head every day and still show up and do the work with your full self. The letter ended with one paragraph. "You told me you returned the envelope because of the example it set for your granddaughter. You said you owed her the example more than you owed her the money. I have thought about that more than you know. I have a son I have not spoken to properly in 4 years. I have been telling myself it is the distance and the time and the difficulty of everything that has happened. Your example showed me I have been wrong. The measure of a person is what they do in the 5 seconds before they realize no one is watching. My father said that. You proved it. I made the call to Daniel last week. We are going to see each other in January. I want you to know that you had something to do with that because you should know. Earl sat on the box in the half-unpacked main room for a long time. Then Maya came out of her bedroom and asked if he was all right, because she had heard him sit down very heavily on something, and she wanted to check. He told her to come and sit beside him, and she did, climbing up on the box next to him in the way of a child who has never questioned whether there was room for her next to the people she belonged to. He told her about the letter. He told her about the foundation and the position and the salary. He told her about Daniel. Maya listened in her complete way. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She looked at the boxes around the room. She looked at the east window, the one that would catch the morning light. He fixed something in his own life, she said, because of what you did. Earl looked at her. Yeah, he said. I think so. Maya nodded slowly. The way she nodded when she was adding something to the internal picture she kept of how the world worked. She tilted her head to the left. Then she said, that's more important than the money. Earl looked at his granddaughter. He thought about Gloria and Denise. He thought about what it meant to be seen clearly by someone small enough to still be forming their understanding of what mattered and large enough already to get it exactly right. Yeah, he said, it is. Maya got up. She said she was going to start assembling her desk because she wanted to draw before dinner, and she needed a surface. Earl told her he would help. She said she had the instructions and she was going to try it herself first. He told her to call him if she needed the heavy part. She said she would. He sat on the box alone for another minute. He held the letter in his hands. He looked at the east window and the afternoon light moving across the floor of the main room. He thought about a stairwell at 6:47 in the morning, a gray work shirt and a mop, and a decision that had taken no time because it was not a decision. It was just the only possible thing. He thought about what his father had given him and what Gloria had given him and what Denise had given him and what Maya gave him every day without trying to. Simply by being exactly who she was, Denise's daughter, Gloria's granddaughter, fully herself. He thought about the $412 in the savings account and about March 1st and about what it had felt like to run the same arithmetic with different variables and never find the version that came out clean. He thought about what it felt like now to not be running it, to feel the ground under his feet and know it was solid and know he had not compromised a single thing he believed in to get there. He set the letter on the box beside him carefully. From Maya's room came the sound of a cardboard box being opened and the soft knock of furniture pieces being sorted on the floor, and then a low sound of concentration, the sound of a 9-year-old who had decided she was going to figure something out. Earl stood up. When he straightened his shirt, he looked at the room around him, the boxes, the light, the east window, the beginning of something that was not yet arranged but was already, in some fundamental way, home. He went to help his granddaughter build her desk. The drawer she put under the window faced east. Every morning that winter, she sat at it with her sketchbook while the light came in low in gold from the direction of the harbor, and she drew what she saw from that window. Crown Street in December, the brownstones opposite, the tree out front that was bare now, but that she was already planning to draw again in April when it had its leaves back. She had a whole series by February. Earl had them framed. 3 of them went on the wall of the main room. One of them, the one she had drawn on the first morning in the apartment, Swana, the one with the light exactly right and a small figure visible in a window across the street, went to Gerald, delivered by Earl in person on a Tuesday morning before his shift. Gerald looked at it for a long time. Then he said it was going on the wall of the corner office. Earl told him it belonged there. He was right. Neither of them were the same men they had been on the third Tuesday of November. The change had not arrived loudly. It had come the way the best changes come, the way light comes through an east window, gradually, completely, in the direction you are already facing, making visible what was always there. A stairwell, an envelope, a decision that took no time at all, and two people who were still carrying what life had asked them to carry, but were carrying it now on different ground, steadier ground. Across a ground that had been prepared by one small act performed in the 5 seconds before anyone was watching, except someone was always watching, and sometimes the right someone sees exactly the right thing at exactly the right time, and sometimes that is enough to change everything. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.